I grew up in a town so small it could have been mistaken for a single long road with some houses scattered along the edges. Mapleton, population just over 2,000. We had one grocery store, one diner, a handful of churches, and a high school that looked like a red brick cube dropped in the middle of a cornfield. Every weekday morning, from the time I was 7 until I was 17, I walked the same cracked two-lane road to catch the bus. My parents never drove me. My dad worked mornings at the mill. My mom opened the diner by 6. So I walked. It was maybe half a mile from our house to the bus stop, and I passed the same things every day. A mailbox leaning from rust at the base, a sagging fence with horses chewing dry grass, and finally the stop itself. It wasn't much. Just a wooden shelter with peeling green paint and a warped bench inside. The kind of thing that would keep the rain off you, but not much else. It smelled of mildew in the summer and of old leaves in the fall. Kids had carved initials and little drawings into the wood over the years. I even left my mark, E+J, back when Jacob Miller and I thought we'd be together forever in 8th grade. That stop was a landmark in my life. I measured my childhood in walks to and from it. But one morning, near the end of junior year, I came around the bend in the road and stopped dead. The shelter was gone. At first I thought maybe the county had torn it down. It wasn't in great shape, and the bus still came, so maybe they figured no one needed it. But the thing that froze me wasn't the absence of the shelter. It was the fact that there was no sign it had ever been there at all. No concrete slab, no packed dirt, no litter. Just a ditch with tall weeds swaying in the wind, as though nothing had ever stood there. I remember standing there, clutching my backpack straps, my throat tight. The bus rumbled up moments later, brakes squealing. The driver, Mrs. Givens, opened the doors. "You getting on, Emily?" she asked, like I was the strange one. On the ride, I asked a couple of kids if they'd noticed the shelter was missing. They looked at me blankly. "What shelter?" one said. "The bus stop," I insisted. "It used to be right there, past the Jenkins fence. Green, wooden, kind of moldy." They shook their heads. A few laughed. That night, I asked my parents. My mom frowned and said she didn't know what I was talking about. My dad told me I must be confusing it with the one by the feed store downtown. I knew I wasn't. Over the next few days, I grew obsessed. I checked old yearbooks and photos. Nothing. I dug through my phone gallery, old pictures with friends waiting for the bus. Except in every one, we were standing by the ditch, never inside a shelter. My carving? Gone. It was like I'd invented the whole thing. After a week, I stopped bringing it up. People already thought I was strange enough. I buried the memory, convinced myself maybe it had been a dream I clung to as real. Time moved on. I graduated, went to college 3 states away. Every time I came home, I walked that road, telling myself I was just taking a stroll. And every time, it was only a ditch. For years, I let it fade. Until last winter. I was home on break, walking to clear my head after an argument with my mom. Snow crunched under my boots, the trees bare and brittle in the wind. I found myself near the ditch again, out of habit. That's when I saw him. A man stood near the roadside, maybe late 40s, wearing a heavy flannel jacket and work boots caked with mud. His breath hung in the cold air. He looked lost, his eyes scanning the fields like he'd been walking a long time. When he spotted me, he hurried over. "Hey," he said, a little out of breath. "You're local, right? Can you help me?" Maybe," I said cautiously. He gestured toward the ditch. "I'm trying to find the old bus stop. The shelter, green paint, bench inside. Used to wait there every morning for school." My stomach dropped. I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. But he kept going. "It should be right here, past the Jenkins fence, yeah? Can't seem to find it anymore." The world tilted under me. My voice cracked. That's exactly what I remember. Relief lit his face, almost feverish. "You remember it too. Thank God. I thought I was losing my mind. Everyone I ask says it was never here." I couldn't breathe. His words were like echoes of my own thoughts from years ago. He stepped closer, eyes locked on mine. "You carved your name, didn't you?" Kids always did. I used to sit inside, waiting out the rain. It smelled like wet leaves. "You remember?" "Yes," I whispered, my throat dry. His expression shifted, hope twisting into desperation. "Then tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me it was real. Tell me they didn't take it." "Who?" I asked, shivering though the wind was still. His face tightened. "The ones who erase things. Little things no one notices. They started with our stop. What else have they taken, huh?" What else do we forget the moment it's gone? He grabbed my wrist suddenly, his grip iron. His eyes burned into mine. Don't let them take it from you too. Hold on, or you'll lose it, just like the rest of us. I yanked free, stumbling back. My pulse roared in my ears. The stranger stood there, trembling, staring at me like I was his last hope. Please, he begged, voice cracking. Don't forget me. Don't forget it. I ran. I didn't look back until I was at my front door, lungs burning, chest tight. The road behind me was empty. It's been months since then, and I still see his face when I close my eyes. I don't know what scares me more, that he was insane and I shared his delusion, or that he was right, and something out there is erasing the world piece by piece, until even the memories of what was lost are gone. Sometimes I dream of the shelter again. Green paint, warped bench, my initials carved into the wood. And every time I wake up, I check my hands to make sure they're still mine. Because I know one day, I'll open my eyes and the memory will be gone completely. Like the stop never existed, like the man never spoke to me, like none of it ever mattered. And that terrifies me more than anything. My name is Marcus Hill. I'm 34, and for the last 6 months I've been driving across the country taking photographs of small towns and roadside places most people overlook. I like forgotten corners, places where time seems to have stalled. The truth is, I'd been drifting after a breakup, and this project was just my excuse to keep moving. One afternoon, heading west through the Midwest, I saw a sign for a town I'd never heard of. It wasn't on my map app, at least not in a way that stood out, but the painted wooden sign by the exit had this old-fashioned charm. Welcome to Hallow Creek, a good place to rest. It felt like something out of the 50s. I was tired, and the daylight was starting to sink into a low orange haze, so I figured why not? One night in a quiet town would give me some good photos and maybe a solid night's sleep. The first thing that struck me was how neat everything looked. Lawns were trimmed, porches freshly painted, not a single boarded-up house or broken sign. But it wasn't sterile. There were flowers in boxes, wind chimes tinkling softly, and people sitting on porches with iced tea in hand. Pleasant, normal. Except something bothered me. It took a while to click. Driving slowly down Main Street, I realized there were no kids. Not one. No bikes tossed on the sidewalk, no basketball hoops, no chalk drawings on driveways. I spotted a diner, a post office, a grocery store, even a little barber shop, but not a school. The gas station was manned by an older man who smiled politely but looked tired, like he hadn't slept in weeks. When I checked into the only motel, the woman at the front desk was cheerful but guarded. Her name tag said Doris. She asked what brought me through, and I told her about my photography project. She nodded, said the town had lots of character. Any chance there's an old schoolhouse or something historic I could photograph? I asked casually. Her smile faltered. For just a second. Then it returned, wider than before, and she said, "Oh, not really. We keep to ourselves here." Then she handed me the key and turned away quickly, as if paperwork suddenly demanded all her attention. I walked around with my camera just before sunset. The town square had a war memorial, some shops, even a fountain with clear water bubbling gently. Adults moved about, talking in small groups, but their conversations ended the moment I got near. I kept waiting to see a stroller, a toddler clinging to someone's leg, teenagers hanging by the gas station. Nothing. Dinner was at a restaurant called Millie's Kitchen. It looked like the perfect small-town diner. Red booths, pie display case, coffee brewing nonstop. Every table was full, but again, all adults. Couples, groups of friends, retirees. Not a single family with kids. It was eerie in a way I couldn't quite explain. It didn't look empty, but it felt empty. At one point, I overheard a man at the counter ask another if the wreaths were holding up okay. The other man said yes, but glanced around nervously like he shouldn't have said it aloud. I wrote it off as small-town gossip. After dinner, I decided to drive around, get some night shots of the neon sign outside the motel. That's when I saw it, a playground. It sat at the end of a quiet street, right beside a row of houses. It looked brand new. Slides gleamed under the streetlight. The jungle gym's paint was fresh, and the swings hung straight and unused. No graffiti, no rust, no worn-down mulch. I parked and walked closer. The swing chains creaked faintly in the breeze, as though someone had just been there. But there was no one. I stood there longer than I should have, camera forgotten in my hand. I realized it wasn't just absence, it was erasure. No toys in the yards, no scribbled chalk, no stickers on windows. Like the town had decided children didn't exist. And yet, someone maintained the playground. Back at the motel, I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m., I gave up, grabbed my jacket, and went for a drive. Small towns at night are usually dead quiet, but here I noticed something stranger. People were awake. Lights in living room windows glowed. Curtains twitched when I drove past, like they were watching me. Eventually, I found myself on the outskirts of town where the road curved toward the woods. That's when my headlights caught something metallic. I slowed, pulled over. It was a plaque, set into a stone at the edge of the trees. Curiosity pushed me out of the car. The plaque was old, weather-worn, surrounded by dried flower wreaths. At the top it read, "In loving memory of our lost children." Below that, dozens of names. First names and last names, neatly etched in rows. All beneath a single date. August 14th, 1998. Every single child in town, gone in one night. I whispered it aloud without meaning to. That's when I heard movement behind me. I turned, heart hammering. A group of townspeople stood on the road, half shadowed by my headlights. At least 10 of them. Their faces were calm, but their eyes weren't. "You shouldn't be out here," one man said. He had the same polite tone I'd heard all day, but it was tighter now. "Visitors aren't meant to see this." My throat was dry. What happened to them? No one answered. A woman stepped forward, holding a lantern. Her face was lined and weary, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "We survived," she said softly. "That's what matters." "What do you mean?" I asked, though my gut told me I didn't want the answer. The group shifted closer, subtly herding me toward the plaque. One of them whispered, "The offering has to be remembered." The children never came back, but the town was spared. I stumbled back. Spared from what? That's when I heard it. From deep within the woods, faint but clear, children laughing. Dozens of voices. Playful, high-pitched, echoing. The hairs on my arms rose. I shined my phone flashlight into the trees, but there was nothing there, just dark trunks and branches swaying. The laughter kept rising, circling, like it was all around me. Panic clawed at me. I turned back toward the car, but 2 men blocked the way. "It's been 25 years, one of them said. "The balance won't last forever." Another voice whispered from the group. "It has to be renewed." They started closing in, pushing me toward the trees. My chest tightened. I tried to shove past, but hands grabbed my arms. Their grip wasn't angry, just firm, inevitable, like they'd done this before. The children's laughter grew louder, now mixed with something else. Whispers. My name. I swore I heard it. "Marcus, Marcus, come play with us." I screamed and thrashed, but they dragged me to the tree line. Lantern light flickered across their faces, calm, resigned, sorrowful. "Don't fight it," the woman said. "It's the only way." I fell to my knees as they shoved me forward into the dark. The last thing I saw was the plaque, glinting under the moonlight. Beneath the last name carved 25 years ago, there was space. A wide empty strip of bronze, waiting for mine. When you live your whole life in the same town, you think you know everybody. You know which kids grew up into drunks, which families split and left their houses empty, and which old-timers keep their lawns perfect because it's the only thing they can control anymore. But Mr. Whitaker, he was different. He moved into the little yellow house across from mine sometime when I was in high school. That was nearly 20 years ago. From the start, there was something peculiar about him. He was quiet, polite, well-dressed when you caught glimpses of him, always in a pressed shirt and slacks, but he never opened his door to anyone. Not once. He had groceries delivered and left on the porch. Same with packages. Sometimes a letter would arrive, and he'd respond not with a knock or a wave, but by sliding a note through the mail slot. Always neatly written, always in the same shade of blue ink. If kids' balls landed in his yard, he'd write a note telling them it was fine to retrieve it, but they should please not disturb his garden. If someone asked if he needed help with the lawn, he'd write back that he was perfectly capable, thank you. Every communication came that way, short, tidy notes in blue. We all thought it was strange, but the town has a way of making space for strangeness. People shrugged it off. Private man, they said. Doesn't like company. And after a while, it just became normal. For me, it was background noise. I'd wave when I saw the curtain shift, when I felt eyes on me from across the street. I got married, got divorced, kept working my electrician jobs, and Mr. Whitaker stayed a mystery behind his door. But then, little things started to gnaw at me. It was his handwriting first. I'd see his notes occasionally. Neighbors would show me, like they were novelties. At some point, I noticed the letters didn't look the same anymore. They used to be crisp, sharp cursive. Then, slowly, they became slanted, shakier, as if someone was imitating them. Then too perfect again, almost traced. Another time, I noticed the smell. On hot July afternoons, a sour, cloying odor drifted from his side of the street. Not enough to knock you down, but enough that you noticed if the wind shifted. People blamed the storm drains or the garbage pickup schedule. I didn't. And then there were the sounds. One night, I was out front fixing my truck's headlight. The neighborhood was quiet, dogs asleep, TV flickers behind windows. Then I heard it, a dragging sound, long and deliberate, like furniture being pulled across hardwood. It came from Whitaker's house. It stopped as suddenly as it started. I told myself I imagined it. But 2 nights later, there it was again. Dragging, then silence. By then, my nerves were shot. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Why had no one seen him in years? Why had we accepted notes as proof of life? Finally, I told myself I'd just check. Not to hurt him, not to snoop, just to know. I waited until late one night, after a storm had rolled through and left the air heavy and quiet. I crossed the street with my flashlight, heart hammering. His porch creaked under my boots. I tried the knob, locked, of course, but the back window was loose. I'd noticed it before from my yard. A push, and it slid open. Inside, the air was stale, like old books left in a damp basement. Dust coated everything. The living room looked untouched, furniture covered in plastic, a neat row of bookshelves, curtains pulled tight. I could almost believe he'd just stepped out. But then I saw the notes. Stacks of them on the coffee table. Neat blue writing. Some crumpled, some half-finished. All of them repeating similar phrases. Thank you, but I need nothing. I am well. Please leave it on the porch. Over and over, the same words, like practice runs. The dragging sound came again, deeper in the house. My mouth went dry. I followed the noise down a narrow hallway. The smell grew stronger with every step, sweet, rotten, clinging to the back of my throat. At the end of the hall was a door, closed, with something dark smeared around the knob. My hand shook as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and cold. A single lamp buzzed weakly in the corner, throwing sickly yellow light over the scene. In the middle of the room, tied upright to a chair with rope, was Mr. Whitaker, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, shriveled, lips peeled back from yellow teeth. His clothes hung in tatters, the fabric melted into his decaying frame. His head lolled forward slightly, chin sunk into his chest. The ropes cut into his skin, long since dried and blackened around the edges. He had been dead for years. I staggered back, gagging. My mind spun. If Whitaker was here, rotting in a chair, then who had been writing the notes? Who had been sliding them through the slot? As if to answer, I heard it, the faint scratch of pen on paper just outside the room. I froze. The scratching stopped. Then came a slow, deliberate rustle. A piece of paper slid under the door into the room, landing at my feet. My hands shook as I bent to pick it up. Blue ink. Neat letters. You shouldn't be here, Mark. My name. My legs nearly gave out. I dropped the note, backing against the wall. My heart thundered in my ears. And then came the footsteps. Soft at first, measured, crossing the hallway. Each one closer. Slow, certain, like whoever, or whatever, was out there knew exactly where I was. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stared at the door, at the widening shadow stretching across the crack at the bottom. The knob began to turn. And that's where I'll leave it, because I don't know how much longer I'll have before it finishes opening the door, before it comes inside, before I find out what's been living here all these years in Mr. Whitaker's place. If anyone finds this, know this, the notes weren't him. They never were. Something else has been answering, and now it knows I know. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 29, and when I moved into the house on Baywood Street, I thought it was a lucky break. Rentals in coastal towns aren't cheap, but this one was half the usual price. The listing had only one blurry photo, a squat gray house with shutters hanging askew, but I told myself it was just bad photography. I was starting a new teaching job at the middle school and needed somewhere fast. Sight unseen, I signed the lease. When I pulled up with my U-Haul, the house looked better than expected. Weathered, yes, but solid. A wraparound porch, wide windows, even a little garden that seemed to bloom on its own. The landlord, a wiry man in his 60s named Mr. Halpern, handed me the keys with minimal fuss. "She creaks a little," he said, "but she'll keep you." It was a strange way to phrase it, but I laughed it off. The first few nights were uneventful. The place smelled faintly of damp wood, but old houses often do. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed the wall in the hallway moving. I froze, hand against the faded floral wallpaper. It wasn't subtle. The plaster pushed outward under my palm, then sank back in, like someone breathing slowly on the other side. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding, but the bulge flattened and the wall looked normal again. Settling wood, I whispered, "Houses shift, expand, contract." But as I stood there in the dim light, the wallpaper puffed outward again, slow and deliberate. I didn't sleep that night. By the end of the week, the noises started. At first they were groans, the kind you'd hear in any old structure, but soon they grew rhythmic, drawn out, almost human. I'd be lying in bed and the house would release this long, low moan that vibrated the bed frame and seemed to travel up through the mattress into my body. I'd sit up gasping, certain someone was inside with me. I tried calling Mr. Halpern. "The walls are moving," I said, immediately regretting how crazy it sounded. He chuckled softly. "Old bones. Don't worry about it. But it's more than creaks. It feels like it's," I struggled for the word, "breathing." That silence on the other end stretched too long. Finally, he said, "She does that sometimes. You'll get used to it." I wanted to press, but his tone was final. One morning, as I walked to the kitchen, a board beneath my foot sagged sharply. I nearly twisted my ankle. Kneeling, I pried it up with a knife. The smell hit me first, damp earth, mildew, something sweetly rotten. Beneath the floorboards was insulation that wasn't just wet. It pulsed faintly, expanding and contracting. My breath caught in my throat. I poked it with the knife tip and something white rolled out. A tooth, not loose like from a child's mouth, but lodged deep in the wood, as if the house had bitten down and grown around it. My stomach churned. I shoved the board back and taped it shut. That night, I dreamed of being inside a rib cage, the walls tightening until I couldn't breathe. I started noticing other things. The wallpaper had dark stains in certain spots, shaped vaguely like handprints. The bathroom mirror fogged even when I hadn't showered, leaving behind faint streaks as though something had leaned close to watch me. And always, the moaning. Sometimes it rose higher, pitched almost like a voice. Once, half asleep, I could have sworn I heard it say my name. I began keeping lights on through the night. Coffee became a crutch just to stay awake at work. My students joked I looked like a ghost. After 2 weeks, I confronted Mr. Halpern in person. He lived in a small cottage near the docks. When he opened the door, his expression was unsurprised. "It's not right," I blurted. "The house, it isn't just old. There's something wrong. The walls, there are teeth." He sighed, motioning me inside. The cottage smelled of salt and tobacco. "The house is older than this town," he said. "Older than the docks, older than the church, older than anything we built here. No one knows who raised it first. It's the structure that keeps itself." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Keeps itself." He leaned closer. "It takes. Every so often. That's why rent is cheap. That's why no one stays long. But you signed the lease, didn't you? That's consent enough." I felt sick. Consent for what? His eyes dropped to the floor. For it to keep breathing. I left before he could say more. I decided to move out. Screw the lease. I packed half my things into the car that night. But when I tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. The frame had warped, the wood pressing tight as though swollen. I tugged, pulled, slammed my shoulder into it. Nothing. The windows were no better. When I tried prying one open, the glass flexed under my hands like plastic wrap, bulging inward, then sealing shut. My panic grew raw, scraping my throat. The house groaned in response, louder than ever, vibrating through the floors and into my bones. The walls swelled around me, the hallway narrowing as plaster pushed inward like inflating lungs. I screamed and ran for the back door, but it slammed shut before I reached it, the frame stretching and snapping like muscle. The air grew hot and damp, heavy with the stench of rot. Wallpaper rippled as if something pressed against it from inside, eager to break through. I stumbled into the living room as the floor began to rise beneath me, boards arching like a chest inhaling. I dropped to my knees, hands slipping against the sweating wood. Then I heard it, a low, wet heartbeat. The walls contracted, pressing closer, squeezing the room. I gasped for breath. My palms pressed against the wallpaper, and it felt warm, alive, pulsing. The faded flowers printed on it warped into shapes of faces screaming silently. "Let me out," I screamed, pounding until my fists bruised. The house answered with a moan so deep it rattled my teeth. The ceiling sagged above me, lowering, the plaster cracking like ribs. The floor rose in tandem, pinning me between them. The room grew hotter, humid, suffocating. As I clawed for air, the wallpaper split open, seams tearing like flesh. Behind it wasn't wood, but a glistening red cavity, slick and shuddering. Rows of embedded teeth lined the gap, waiting. I tried one last time to crawl away, but the floor buckled and heaved, throwing me forward. The walls rippled like a throat swallowing. I was dragged in. By morning, the house sat quiet again on Baywood Street, gray and unassuming. The wallpaper was smooth, the floors firm, the air fresh as though scrubbed clean. And when Mr. Halpern came by later, he found no trace of me. Only the lease on the counter, signed neatly, as if that was all that had ever been there. The house sighed once, content, then grew still, waiting. I've done a lot of camping trips, but the one to Weller Pond is the only one I wish I'd never taken. It was me, Brian, and Kate. We were all 20-somethings then, co-workers who bonded over hiking and long weekends. I was the one with the most gear, so I usually picked the spots. That summer, I suggested the Adirondacks. Big, quiet, miles of trail where you could walk half a day without seeing anyone. We ended up at Weller Pond. The name barely came up online, just a passing mention on a paddling forum. It sounded perfect, secluded, off the main routes, nothing but water and trees. We parked at a small gravel lot, shouldered our packs, and hiked in. The day was hot and still. No traffic hum, no distant machinery, just cicadas, the creak of our straps, and the occasional squawk of a jay. By evening, we had camp set up at the edge of the pond. The water was glassy, reflecting the red streaks of sunset. A loon called somewhere across the lake, the sound eerie and beautiful. "This is paradise," Kate said, dropping her boots and letting her toes sink into the mud. It did feel like paradise. For a little while. The next morning, we decided to take a side trail that followed the pond's shoreline. It was overgrown, more game path than proper trail. We pushed through ferns, ducked under branches, until the trees opened onto a clearing right at the water's edge. That's when we saw it. Half submerged in the pond was a stone structure, like an altar or table. Moss and lichen covered most of it, but you could see grooves carved across the top in looping patterns. The edges were sharp enough that it couldn't be natural. "Creepy picnic table," Brian joked, but his laugh sounded forced. Around us, the trees were scarred with markings. Not initials or graffiti, symbols. Spirals, jagged crosses, concentric circles carved deep into the bark. Some looked decades old, others strangely fresh. I snapped a picture with my phone. "Local art project?" I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The woods felt suddenly heavier. No birdsong, no wind, just stillness. We didn't linger. That night, the air didn't cool down the way it should. The forest pressed in, hot and close, the pond black under the moonlight. We sat around our fire, eating noodles out of tin bowls. It was Kate who froze first, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Listen," she whispered. At first, I heard nothing. Then it came, faint but steady, a rhythm, like drumming. Boom, 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 pause, boom, carried through the trees, too far to place, but undeniably human. We stared into the dark woods. Brian forced a laugh. Somebody brought bongos. Big deal. But the sound went on for nearly an hour, never closer, never fading. Just there. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was worse. We barely slept. At dawn, I stumbled out of my tent and nearly screamed. Our fire pit had changed. The stones we'd stacked around the ashes were gone. No, not gone. Rearranged. Laid out in a ring a few feet from camp. Each one evenly spaced, pointing inward like markers. "Did you too?" I started, but Kate's face was pale, her lips pressed tight. Brian shook his head violently. We packed fast. No breakfast, no lingering. My hands shook as I shoved gear into my bag. By the time we reached the gravel lot, the three of us were brittle with nerves, jumping at every crack of a branch. Our car sat alone under the trees. I could have wept with relief, but the relief didn't last. Because our stuff, what we'd left in the trunk, wasn't in the trunk anymore. It was laid out in the dirt. Our sleeping pads, spare clothes, water jugs, all arranged in a spiral pattern curling outward from the driver's side door. And at the center, on a folded tarp, lay a note. I picked it up with numb fingers. The handwriting was mine. My own. We asked for silence. You agreed. We didn't speak as we crammed everything back into the car. Kate was crying silently. Brian kept muttering no, no, no under his breath. I jammed the keys into the ignition and prayed it would start. That's when the drumming began again. Not distant this time. Close. From the trees just beyond the lot. Boom, 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 boom. Figures stepped out from the shadows, one by one. There were 5, maybe 6. Faces hidden behind crude masks of bark, strips of pine and birch strapped with twine. Their bodies streaked with black paint, bare chests shining with sweat. Each carried something. Drums, sticks, a long branch curved like a staff. They moved with slow certainty, circling us as the drumming grew louder. Brian shouted at them, voice cracking. "Stay back." They didn't answer. Kate clutched my arm, nails digging deep. "Danny, drive." I tried. The engine coughed, sputtered, refused. The masked figures closed the circle, drumming relentless, the sound vibrating in my chest. One bent and pressed a painted hand to the hood of the car. Another tapped the glass of Kate's window with a stick, rhythmic, like keeping time. Through it all, the pond shimmered behind them, ripples spreading though no wind stirred. The water seemed to boil in the moonlight, as if something waited just beneath the surface. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I recall is daylight. The car was moving, the road stretching behind us. My hands were on the wheel, white-knuckled. Kate and Brian were silent, staring straight ahead. We never spoke of it again, but I still dream of the spiral, of the note in my own handwriting. And sometimes, when the world goes quiet around me, I swear I hear that rhythm again. Boom, 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 calling me back to the silence. My name's Jason McNeil, I'm 17, and everyone in my town has heard of Black Hollow Road. It's one of those stretches of asphalt parents warn you about, not because of drunks or deer, but because of the lights. Everyone's got a story. A cousin who saw orbs, an uncle who lost half an hour, an old neighbor who swore their truck wouldn't start. But when you ask for proof, no one has any. Just whispers. To me, it sounded like nothing more than small-town folklore, the kind of thing old-timers tell to keep kids from joyriding. My friends dared me to drive it at night, but they never came along. That Friday, after closing up at the hardware store, I decided I'd settle it myself. Prove it was all bullshit. The road branched off Route 17, dipping into low forest where the trees pressed, so close the stars barely showed. The pavement cracked in places, guardrails rusted through. I rolled down my window and let the night air rush in, thick with pine and damp earth. My headlights stretched into the dark, catching branches that looked like skeletal arms reaching overhead. For the first few miles, nothing happened. No strange lights, no dead animals, no phantom figures. Just a road like any other. I laughed to myself, feeling that teenage smugness when you think you've beaten some dumb superstition. Then the radio cut out. 1 second it was blasting a rock station. The next it was nothing but static, deep, grinding, metallic, not like normal radio fuss. I turned the dial, but every frequency was the same screech. That's when I saw it. The sky ahead bloomed with white light, so bright it drowned my headlights completely. Not a spotlight, not high beams. This was the entire horizon tearing open. My stomach dropped. The wheel jerked in my hands, and I pulled over before I veered into the ditch. The light poured down in columns, rippling like water. My dashboard flickered, then went black. The engine sputtered and died. Silence. I sat gripping the wheel, heart pounding. My breath fogged the glass, though the air around me had gone hot and heavy, pressing against my skin like a humid summer storm. The static on the radio rose higher, sharp enough to make my teeth ache. I tried cranking the key. Nothing. Tried again, harder. Dead. My phone had 1 bar of service, then none. The screen froze, then went blank. The light grew so intense I had to shield my eyes. My whole body buzzed, hair lifting as though static clung to every inch of me. And then, blackness. I don't know how long I was out. When I opened my eyes, the dashboard clock blinked 12 o'clock like it had reset, then jumped to 5:47 a.m. My heart hammered in my chest. Last time I'd looked, it was just after midnight. The car engine rumbled softly, alive again. Headlights cut across a road I didn't recognize. My phone lit back up on the passenger seat, battery half drained, though I hadn't touched it. I drove in a daze, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Signs flashed past, mile markers, then a faded green highway sign that made my blood run cold. I was 27 miles from Black Hollow Road. No memory of driving. No sense of time passing. Just here. Back home. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd blacked out. Maybe exhaustion caught up with me. But the questions clawed at me all morning. When I finally picked up my phone, there was a new photo in my gallery. My hands trembled as I opened it. The image showed Black Hollow Road, night dark, lit only by the faint halo of my car headlights. The perspective was from the ditch, angled up toward where I had parked. I didn't remember taking it. In the bottom corner of the frame was a figure. Blurry. Tall. Too tall. The proportions were wrong. Arms too long. Head tilted unnaturally. Face pale and smoothed out like wax. It stood half in shadow, watching me. I dropped the phone. My stomach flipped. For days, I tried ignoring it. Went to school, worked my shifts, played it off to friends who laughed when I admitted I'd driven the road. But every night, I found myself scrolling back to that photo. The first night, I thought the figure's head was tilted left. The second night, it seemed straighter. By the third, it had shifted forward, closer to the center of the frame. I showed no one. Who'd believe me? I tried deleting it. The gallery glitched, froze, then reopened with the picture still there. I tried again and again, but it never erased. The fifth night, I woke at 3 a.m. with my phone glowing on the nightstand. The photo was open by itself. My skin went cold. The figure was larger now, taking up half the screen, its arms dangling toward the ground like ropes. Last night, I sat in the dark staring at it. My room was silent, my parents asleep down the hall. The photo glowed, washing my face in white light. But something was wrong. The figure was gone. Not blurry, not shifted. Gone. The ditch was empty. I stared until my vision blurred, waiting for it to flicker back. It never did. That's when I heard the static. Soft at first, seeping from my phone speaker. Then louder, buzzing, rising like it had on the road. My lamp flickered. My laptop screen lit up across the room. I froze, phone still in my hand. The static stopped, and I felt someone standing in the corner of my room. I grew up in the library. Not literally, of course, but close enough. My parents both worked long shifts, and summers in our small town didn't offer much beyond Little League and the movie theater that only opened on weekends. So I spent my days among the shelves at the Maple Hollow Public Library, where Mrs. Harper kept watch. She was the kind of librarian everyone loved. Kind-eyed, quick with a recommendation, always remembering which books you'd read last. She had gray hair she kept in a bun, floral cardigans, and a habit of humming old hymns under her breath while she reshelved books. I must have read half the children's section under her supervision. So when Mrs. Harper vanished, it was impossible not to notice. There was no obituary, no retirement announcement. One day she was there, helping a kid find an encyclopedia entry on frogs, and the next, the desk was empty. I asked at the circulation counter what had happened, but the only answer I got was a stiff, quiet, "She's no longer here." The next morning, the replacement arrived. She introduced herself only once, to no one in particular, in a flat, even tone. "I am Miss Gray." She was pale, with thin lips pressed into a line and eyes that didn't blink often enough. Her clothes were simple and old-fashioned, high-necked blouses and long skirts, never slacks, never jewelry. She worked like a machine. She scanned, stamped, and shelved with no wasted motion. She didn't smile. If you thanked her, She nodded once and nothing more. Children stopped going to the counter. Parents whispered uneasily. Something in her presence drained the air out of the library. The first odd thing happened a week later. My cousin Daniel was in a wreck on Route 14. His car flipped in the rain, and he broke his collarbone. The night before, I had been browsing the nonfiction shelves when a slim, cracked-spined book caught my eye. Its title was plain, Highway Accidents in Maple Hollow. I flipped it open. Inside, instead of general history, it listed dates and names, written in neat blocky type. My stomach lurched when I found an entry that hadn't happened yet. June 12, 2021. Daniel McLean, Route 14, single car rollover, injuries non-fatal. I shoved it back into place, unsettled, convincing myself it was some kind of weird archival record or a morbid prank. But the next day, when the phone rang with news of Daniel's accident, I nearly dropped the receiver. The description had been exact, down to the road and his name. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Then came the whispers. I was tutoring two of my 8th graders at one of the study tables when both suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" one whispered. I hadn't, until I strained. Then I caught it. A faint susurration, like overlapping voices, weaving through the shelves. Not words I could make out, but steady, rising and falling like breath. The boys bolted, knocking over their chairs. I followed quickly, pulse hammering. Miss Gray didn't even look up from her ledger as we passed the desk. Word spread fast in town. People began avoiding the library. Parents stopped bringing their kids. Those who did go in came out pale, shaken, muttering about hearing their names whispered from the stacks. One evening, I braved the shelves again, determined to prove it was all paranoia. I picked a random book from the new arrivals display, Tragedies of Maple Hollow. Inside were detailed entries of barn fires, drownings, heart attacks. Some were years old, things I remembered from my teens. But others had dates that hadn't arrived yet. One was for Mrs. Kearney, my neighbor, cardiac arrest, September 2nd, 2021. She was alive and well at the time. On September 2nd, the ambulance lights flickered outside her house. I stopped going after that, but the books kept appearing. Students whispered about them. A colleague swore he'd seen his own name on a page. And Miss Gray remained steady behind the desk, unchanging, her pale eyes following every person who dared approach. One afternoon I asked her directly, summoning what little courage I had, "Where's Mrs. Harper?" Miss Gray's pen paused mid-stroke in her ledger. She looked at me without expression, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, in that same flat tone, "Balance requires replacement." I left without another word. The final week was the worst. Every shelf, every display, every card, filled only with titles about fire. The Flames of 1892, The Great Burning, Ashes of Tomorrow, and every single one carried dates that hadn't arrived yet. I opened one, hands shaking. Inside, in black ink, October 17th, 2021, fire begins at Maple Hollow Diner. Spreads to Main Street. 8 structures destroyed. For lives lost. October 17th was 3 days away. I told myself it was coincidence. Propaganda. Anything but what it looked like. On October 16th, Miss Gray vanished. The library was locked, blinds drawn. A single sheet of paper sat on the desk inside the window, visible if you cupped your hands against the glass. In perfect block letters, balance kept. The next morning, I woke to sirens. By the time I reached downtown, flames were devouring the diner and leaping to the buildings beside it. Smoke turned the sky black. People screamed and dragged hoses across the street, but it was hopeless. The fire trucks couldn't keep up. I herded my students out of the middle school and toward the evacuation buses, my throat raw from smoke. All around me was chaos, shattering glass, collapsing timbers, the acrid stench of burning plastic. In the madness, I looked toward the library. Through the roiling smoke, I swore I saw a figure standing at the second-story window. Still, watching, not Mrs. Harper. Whether it was Miss Gray or something else, I'll never know. The fire destroyed half the town. 4 people died. When the library was finally reopened weeks later, the shelves were empty. The ledgers were gone. Only one book remained on the desk, its title etched in flaking gold, The Librarian's Replacement. I haven't dared open it. My name is Daniel Price. I'm 41, divorced, and working as an insurance adjuster back in the same town I grew up in. Returning wasn't part of the plan. After my marriage fell apart, I just wanted somewhere cheap, familiar, quiet. My hometown had all three. I told myself I knew this place, every street and alley. I'd memorized the cracked sidewalks walking to school, the corner store where we bought candy, the sagging baseball diamond where we wasted summer evenings. Nothing here could surprise me. I was wrong. It happened late one Tuesday. I left work past 9, exhausted from staring at claim forms all day. Instead of heading home the usual way, I took the old county road out of habit, the one that cut across farmland and spilled back toward town from the north side. I hadn't driven it in years, not since high school. That's when I saw the sign. It was crooked, rust bleeding through the paint, but the words were unmistakable. Welcome to Mill Crossing. My town. Same name, same lettering. But I didn't remember a border sign standing there, tilted at the edge of the woods. It looked like it had been there forever, weather-beaten and rooted into the soil. I slowed but kept driving. And as soon as my tires rolled past that sign, everything shifted. The town ahead looked the same, but not right. Streetlights flickered weakly over cracked asphalt. Every house sat exactly where it should, same porches, same yards. Mailboxes carried the same familiar names: Rodriguez, Thompson, Green. My neighbors, the people I'd known as a kid. But the streets were empty. Not quiet in the usual way, either. Silent. The diner on Main Street glowed faintly from inside, neon buzzing in the window, but there were no waitresses wiping down counters, no customers in booths. The hardware store stood with its door propped open, though the interior was pitch black. I drove past the old elementary school. The building was lit, classroom windows glowing as if lessons were still going, but the lot was bare. No cars, no children. I parked, stepped out, and the sound of my car door echoed like a gunshot in the hollow night. The air was heavy still. No crickets, no distant hum of traffic. Just me, my own breathing, and the eerie sensation that someone was watching from behind each window. I walked for nearly an hour, circling blocks I knew by heart, but finding no one. Curtains glowed faintly, television light pulsing, but the living rooms were empty. At one house, I swore I heard a voice from inside. A murmur of conversation, but when I pressed my ear to the glass, it was only static, like a broken recording. I checked my phone. No service. The screen froze, then rebooted, showing only the battery icon before fading again. My legs shook as I stumbled back toward the edge of town. When I crossed the crooked sign again, the silence broke all at once. Cars in the distance, wind through the trees, a dog barking somewhere down the block. Everything was normal. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who'd believe me? But the image of those deserted streets wouldn't leave my head. It was like seeing a photograph of my town after everyone had been erased. Then the letters started coming. The first was a plain white envelope in my mailbox, return address stamped, Mill Crossing. Inside was a power bill, real enough, except the address said 214 Bay Street. Same number as my Pine Street rental, but Bay Street didn't exist here. Not in my Mill Crossing. The next week came catalogs, furniture sales, coupons, addressed to me, but stamped from this wrong version of town. I even got a letter in handwriting that matched my own, though I never wrote it. Neighbors started showing up on the envelopes, too. Mrs. Green across the street, the Ing family down the block. I asked them about it, and they swore they'd never mailed anything. Their faces tightened when I showed them the postmarks. "Don't go down that road again," Mrs. Green muttered once, voice low. "Not if you value staying here." 2 months later, I woke to the sound of my mailbox slamming shut. It was 3 in the morning. I stepped outside, cold air biting my skin, and found another envelope sitting in the slot. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 4 words, typed neatly in block letters. "We're still waiting." I froze. The street was empty, every house dark, but when I looked down toward the far end of the block, I saw it. The crooked sign. It shouldn't have been visible from here, but it was, glowing faintly as if lit from within. The letters Mill Crossing pulsed softly, once, twice, like a heartbeat. Since then, I've caught glimpses. Passing reflections in windows that don't match my movements. Mail that keeps piling up from streets that shouldn't exist. The other town hasn't left me alone. Some nights I dream I'm walking its silent streets again, hearing nothing but my own footsteps. Sometimes, in the dream, I see people at last. Neighbors, old classmates, clerks at the hardware store. But their faces are too smooth, like unfinished masks. They raise their hands to wave, mouths moving as if to speak, but no sound comes. And when I wake, there's always a new envelope waiting. Last night, the letter read, "Cross again. This time stay." I haven't left the house since, but I know I can't avoid it forever. Because when I looked out my kitchen window this morning, the crooked sign wasn't at the end of the county road anymore. It was planted in my yard, glowing faintly, waiting for me to step across. I've lived in Maplewood my whole life. Long enough to know the back roads without looking at a map. Long enough to remember which barns had collapsed winters ago. Long enough to hear every small town rumor. And I've been the editor of the Maplewood Gazette for over 20 years. Long enough to know that most strange stories boil down to drunk hunters, rowdy teenagers, or whether doing something weird. But the Crow Graveyard, it still keeps me up at night. It started with a group of hikers. 3 college kids from Albany who came into the newsroom with pale faces and trembling hands. They had photos on their phones, grainy, shaky, but impossible to ignore. A clearing in the state forest, maybe the size of a basketball court. And in it, thousands of crows. All dead, not scattered, not piled. Laid down, in perfect, concentric circles. From the photos, you could see how deliberate it was. Wings folded neatly against bodies. Heads turned inward. Ring after ring after ring. Dark feathers shining under the gray sky. No blood. No torn flesh. No bullet holes. Just a clearing carpeted with the dead. The kids wanted to know who to call. The sheriff? The Park Service? The EPA? I told them to sit tight while I got someone who'd know what to make of it. That someone was Dr. Alan Reeves. Alan was the closest thing Maplewood had to a scientist. He'd been a biology professor in Syracuse before moving back to his hometown. Since then, he'd been the town's unofficial naturalist, writing birdwatching columns for the paper and giving lectures at the library. He was meticulous, skeptical, and sharp-eyed. When I showed him the photos, he didn't laugh. He just went very still. "Where exactly?" he asked. The kids gave him GPS coordinates. He wrote them down, already reaching for his coat. "You coming?" he asked me. I should have said no, but I didn't. The hike-in was long, maybe 4 miles from the access road. We didn't talk much. The forest was unusually quiet. No bird calls, no rustling squirrels. Just our boots on damp earth. And then we stepped into the clearing. The photos hadn't done it justice. There had to be at least 1,000 crows, maybe more. Their black bodies stretched in rings so precise they could have been measured with a compass. Each bird lay on its belly, wings tucked. Not one was askew. Alan crouched and examined them. "No trauma," he murmured. "No scavenging. Look, eyes are intact." He pulled on gloves and carefully turned one bird over. Its breastbone pressed white against the thin skin, but otherwise it was whole. I tried not to gag at the smell. Not decay exactly, more like iron and wet feathers. Alan sketched the circles in his notebook. He muttered measurements to himself, tracing the distance between rings. Too deliberate. This isn't natural. One of the kids whispered, "So who would do this?" Alan didn't answer. The sheriff brushed us off, said it was probably disease, avian flu maybe, and that the pattern was just kids messing around. But Alan kept going back. He collected samples, feathers, soil, water from a nearby stream. He stayed up nights combing through old field guides, trying to match the symbols of the rings to something. Migration behavior, magnetic anomalies, anything. I joined him once more. The crows were still there, but the smell had deepened, heavy and cloying. Alan swore the outer ring had shifted slightly since our first visit. I couldn't tell if he was right or if the whole place was playing tricks on my eyes. 3 days later, he was gone. His truck was found at the trailhead. His field kit was inside. No note, no trace. The sheriff shrugged it off as another lost hiker. Said Alan probably wandered too far off trail. But I knew better. Alan had been walking those woods his whole life. He wouldn't have gotten lost. That's when the clearing vanished. When I tried to show my reporter the GPS coordinates, the aerial maps didn't match. Satellite view showed nothing but unbroken forest. No clearing, no gap. I checked old topographic surveys, same thing. It was like the place had never existed. Even the hikers swore they couldn't find their photos anymore. Their phones had blank gray squares where the images should have been. But I remembered, and I wasn't the only one. The dreams began soon after. At first, they were scattered reports. One of the hikers calling me at midnight, voice trembling, saying he dreamt of standing in a ring of crows unable to move. Then my neighbor told me she dreamt of black feathers falling like snow, covering her bed. Then I started having them too. In mine, I stand in the clearing. The crows are alive this time, all of them upright, watching me. The air is so heavy I can't breathe. Then the wings begin to beat, a deafening roar in the dark, though none of them leave the ground. I always wake gasping. I started digging into archives at the library, old folklore collections. That's when I found it, a pamphlet from the 1920s about circle rites in the Adirondacks. It described rituals where animals were laid in rings to mark the passage into silence. The diagrams in the pamphlet matched the clearing exactly. When I tried to photocopy the pages, the machine jammed. The words blurred, unreadable. The worst was when people began sleepwalking. One of the hikers was found barefoot at the edge of the forest, miles from his dorm. Another was discovered in his backyard, standing in a circle of stones he swore he hadn't arranged. And last week, I woke up in the woods myself. No coat, no shoes. Just standing in the damp leaves, not far from where the clearing had been. My feet were cut, my skin clammy. The only sound was the faint rustle of wings overhead, though the sky was empty. Last night, the dream changed. I wasn't standing alone. There were others with me. People from town, faces I recognized in the dark, their eyes wide, their mouths moving in unison though I couldn't hear words. At our feet, the soil was soft with feathers. The circles stretched out wider than before, not just birds now, but shapes I couldn't name. Above us, something vast moved, blotting out the stars. And then came the whisper. One circle left. I don't know what it means. But tonight, I'm afraid to sleep. Because I think when the last circle is finished, none of us will wake up again. My name is Aaron Caldwell. I'm 35, and I've spent the last year trying to rebuild my life in the same small town I swore I'd never come back to. I left for the city after high school, chasing stories, working as a stringer for mid-sized newspapers that chewed me up and spat me out. When my father passed, I returned, not because I wanted to, but because someone had to sell the house, sort the estate, keep the pieces together. Now I write for the Mill Crossing Gazette, a paper barely surviving on obituaries, bake sale notices, and the occasional political spat. Most days are dull, until the day the sky wrote back to us. It was a Tuesday, cloudless, late summer. The heat was sharp, the air shimmering above asphalt. I was outside the library, scribbling notes for an article about school renovations, when a ripple of voices spread through the street. People were pointing upward. I followed their gaze. There it was, stretched across the blue like letters traced by a giant invisible hand. Return. The word hung in the air, soft-edged but distinct, as though sculpted from mist. The letters shifted faintly, curling like smoke, yet never broke apart. There were no planes overhead, no contrails, just that word, burning itself into every pair of eyes. I heard gasps, whispered prayers, someone muttering, "It's a sign." Then, as quickly as it formed, the word dissolved into nothing. By the time I raised my camera, the sky was empty again. Back in the newsroom, I called the nearest weather station. "You're telling me it was clear?" I asked. "Not a single cloud cell over your county," the meteorologist insisted. "Sky's like glass. You sure you weren't looking at contrails?" I pressed harder, but the data was clear. Nothing should have been visible. The next day's paper ran with my cautious headline, "Word in the clouds? Dozens report unexplained skywriting." I framed it as a curiosity, a case of mass suggestion. People see faces in toast. They see saints on billboards. Why not a word in the sky? But the town didn't let it go. 3 days later, I was locking up my father's house when I heard a knock on the door. It was Martin Givens. I hadn't seen him since high school. He'd left for Chicago years ago, last I heard working in construction. Now he stood barefoot on my porch, jeans torn, eyes glassy. "I had to come back," he whispered. "Martin, what are you doing here?" His voice shook. The dream. I kept seeing Mill Crossing. Over and over. A voice kept saying, "Return. It's time." I stared at him, a chill prickling my skin. That night, I heard from others. Old residents who'd moved away decades earlier. College kids who'd sworn never to return, retirees who'd sold their homes, even families that had uprooted entirely, were walking back into town one by one. Some drove in with blank faces. Others stumbled in on foot, dazed. All with the same story. They dreamed of the town calling them back. A voice repeating return. The Gazette's phones rang nonstop. People wanted answers. Ministers preached it was God's sign. Cynics claimed it was some viral stunt. But every night, more ex-residents arrived. The population swelled beyond what our streets could hold. Empty houses filled again, sometimes with families long gone. I drove past the old Peterson place and saw lights glowing in the windows, though the house had been abandoned for 15 years. One evening, I stopped a woman who'd returned from Boston. Her name was Claire, someone I'd interviewed before she left to study law. "What brought you back?" I asked. Her face was pale. I didn't want to, but the dream wouldn't let me rest. Every time I closed my eyes, the town was there, waiting. It's like something was reaching for me. By the 6th day, the town was in chaos. Strangers, yet not strangers, filled the sidewalks. People embraced family members who had been gone half a lifetime, while others shut their doors, terrified of the influx. I spent nights awake, staring out my window, afraid to sleep. On the 7th day, just before dawn, I saw it again. The sky was pale gray, streaked with the first light of morning. Slowly, the mist gathered. Letters unfurled, shimmering white. This time, it wasn't return. It was my name. Aaron. Beneath it, one smaller word. Stay? My breath locked in my chest. I scrambled for my camera, but by the time I clicked the shutter, the letters were dissolving. My hands shook so badly the photo came out blurred. I told no one, not even Paul, my editor. What could I say? That the town itself had called me out. That the same force drawing people back had written to me directly? That night, I woke to a sound outside. I crept to the window. In the square, hundreds of people stood in silence. Some were locals. Many were those who'd returned. Their faces tilted upward, eyes glassy, mouths moving in unison. At first I thought they were chanting, but when I opened the window, I realized they were whispering. One word, over and over. Stay, stay, stay. Above them, the clouds glowed faintly. Not letters this time, but shifting mist, bending, curling, like something trying to form again. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed. The whispers seeped into me, filling the air, crawling under my skin. I shut the window, pulled the curtains, and tried to convince myself it was a nightmare. But when I checked the porch at dawn, there was an envelope waiting. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single slip of paper, the ink smeared but legible. It's your turn now. I haven't left town since. Every attempt feels wrong, as though the road will fold back on itself, leading me home no matter how far I drive. I see familiar faces at every corner, neighbors long dead, classmates who moved away. They smile when they pass me. They all smile. And every night, when I close my eyes, the dream starts again. A voice, calm and patient, whispering only 2 words. Stay, stay.